Good morning. We welcome you to the Wednesday, May the 8th meeting of the Utah Board of Trustees for the Utah Transit Authority. We'd invite you to stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll begin with our Safety First Minute with Sheldon Shaw. Sheldon, good morning.
Good morning, Chair, Trustees. Appreciate the opportunity as always. So my safety message today is about motorcycle safety. The weather is turning nice and folks are getting their motorcycles out of their garages and they're driving them around. And unfortunately, we don't see motorcycles. They're in our blind spot and we cut them off, and it's unfortunately very dangerous to ride a motorcycle. There was a study done by Northwestern University where they looked at the fatalities per billion miles traveled. And the safest way to get around our streets is actually buses, just like the ones we operate here at UTA. There's 0.11 fatalities per billion miles when you ride the bus. But if you're riding a motorcycle, that number is 212 fatalities per billion miles. And so it's a gigantic magnitude more dangerous. It's also important because there's a new law going to come into effect Tuesday next week, which is lane filtering. And so motorcycles are going to be allowed on streets where you come to a stop at either a stoplight or a stop sign, speed limit less than 45 miles an hour, they'll be able to filter to the front. And so that's a help for motorcycles. They're not in the back where they get run into, which happens sometimes, and so it gets them up front. It helps with activating stoplights where motorcycles oftentimes aren't big enough to activate the stoplight. So if cars are there, we'll get more vehicles through stoplights. But we should all be aware that that's going to happen here, that motorcycles are going to filter forward. So appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Sheldon. Great advice. We'll next go to our public comment. Bob, any?
None today.
None today. Thank you. Our next item up is approval of our minutes from May the 1st of 2019. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve those minutes. Seeing no other discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Next up will be our agency report, and we'll go to our interim executive director, Steve Meyer.
Good morning, Chair. Morning, Board. 3 items I'd like to cover this morning. First is our Tiger Grant project. I'll have Heather and Mary DiLoretto Gray come up and give you a quick update on the status of that project.
Am I on? All right. Good morning. I'm Heather Binning, Project Manager, Capital Projects. You want to introduce yourself?
Gray Turner, Program Manager for over engineering and project development. Heather is one of our project managers, one of our new project managers, I will add, that has been with us for a couple of months now and has just taken over the Tiger Grant that's been going on for about the last couple of years. We've been doing projects for about the last year, so she'll give you an update on what's going on.
Okay. So the Tiger Grant is through U.S. Department of Transportation, administered through Federal Transit Administration. UTA applied for the grant in 2016. Tiger stands for Transportation Investment Generating Economic Recovery. And the goal of the project is to reduce and remove barriers to transit access and transportation corridors in order to connect communities, employment centers, educational institutes, public services, and other community resources. This project will improve safety for pedestrian and cyclists with an emphasis on developing mobility for transportation disadvantaged communities and the creation of ladders of opportunity. So the grant itself, the award amount was $20 million. We have $11.8 million in matching funds. That's made up of funds from various cities, counties, MAG, WFRC, UDOT, also UTA local, excuse me, and Prop 1 funds. So that's a total of $31.8 million in the Tiger projects, and that's made up of 161 different projects. Union Pacific Railroad.
Okay.
So that funding specifically is for pedestrian overpass bridge in Salt Lake City 300 North.
Okay.
So that's something we're still working on. So we haven't started that project yet, but that's where that funding is for.
Okay.
There is a commitment for $75.7 million for the first last mile program. So $43.9 million of that are non-Tiger projects under the control of other agencies, not UTA. So maybe UDOT or another agency. So we completed the environmental documentation in January of 2018. It was several categorical exclusions that had to be done for each individual project, and that had to be done before the grant could be executed. So the grant was executed February 8th, 2018, and we have until December 2021 to complete construction of all of the projects, and then we'll still have time to close out after that, but that's the deadline for construction completion.
Can I question, and maybe too early in the process to do? I remember in my prior role, coming up with some funding from the county side, and exceptionally grateful that UTA was administering it because of all the local deals and all the federal requirements associated with the size of projects. Do we have any regrets that we did all these projects under one grant, or if we were doing it again? I just, is there a lesson learned? You obviously aren't going to go back, and it's been a good opportunity. I'm not trying to undermine that.
The story is still unfolding. There are a lot of lessons learned that we have learned so far. Heather mentioned the category, the environmental clearances that needed to be done. That was something we weren't anticipating, that not only a CADX, but also a concept report for each project needed to be done. And so after we were awarded the grant, we found that out. And so we had to go back and spend quite a bit of time and money to do that. So, we would have talked to the county and to the cities, and if they wanted a project to be included, we probably would have had them do their own CADX and their own concept report and get it to us by a certain date. And then we include that into the grant. So, but that was, like I say, we didn't know that. We know that now. We would do it differently by doing it next time, but we're still learning a lot of things. So I think it's even still too early to determine what our best practices would be.
I'll say on the plus side, it's been a great opportunity to work with a lot of different agencies and communities, and they get to see some real direct benefit, meeting some very specific needs in the communities for access, ADA ramps, bike lanes, connections of segments of sidewalks that we're missing in a community, as well, bike repair stations, all kinds of things that reflect well on us in our efforts.
Yeah, I have a little doubt that a lot of the work would not get done or would be done a long time from now, but so there's great value. I just, if I weren't at UTA, I'd say thank you, UTA. I would still say that, but you have taken a heavy load in this discussion.
We ask ourselves that question too sometimes. Why did we do this? But it is a benefit, and we are seeing even just attitudes towards UTA is changing. That we are helping communities out and doing small projects that they might not normally do, or that would just pass over. And so this has been a good opportunity for us to do those and kind of build that trust with the communities.
I had a question in regards to, there's a couple communities up in the Weber area that benefited from that were very, very excited to get engaged in that aspect. Did the cost changes impact some of the projects in any way, or?
Tell you what, let's get That's going to come up in a
Yeah.
slide, so we'll talk about that.
Okay. So moving on. So this is a summary of the 161 projects that we have. This is how we report to FTA. So they're by project types, and then we have the number of projects per type. So looking at like the projects that are bike parking, bike repair stands, and bus stop improvements, those are basically the UTA projects. So about 70 of those projects are considered to be UTA projects. Most of the other projects would be like a city project. This map can be found on the project website. So it's an interactive GIS map where you can click on the different city and it'll zoom you into that location. And then you'll see the project ID, which is by city, project type, and then number. So you can actually, if you're curious what's going on in Draper, you can click on Draper. It'll zoom you in. You can click on the project and you can get the CADX document and the concept report. So it's pretty useful if you're curious about a certain project that's ongoing or might be upcoming. Okay, so agreements and contracts. I know you guys have seen these phase 2 agreements or amendments coming through, but some of the other contracts we have the stakeholder agreements. So those are the agreements between, say, like us and one city, and it'll define the scope and budget for their projects. It would also discuss who's responsible for any overages and the project cost, which would be on the city. And then it would discuss who maintains the project afterwards. So those city projects, they're going to get turned over to the cities, and then they will maintain them and they'll report back to us for a certain period of time, and we'll report to FTA on those projects. We also have professional services contracts in place. So civil science is doing basically the design on almost all of the projects. Some of the projects already had designs completed previously, but anything that needed design was being done by civil science. So we had, one designer working on all of the Tiger projects. And then we also have a contract with Alta Planning and Design. They specialize in active transportation. So they're in more of a support role, or they'll attend design meetings and provide input and do design reviews for us. And then for construction, we have a construction management general contractor agreement with Granite Construction. So the initial contract with them was for pre-construction services. So that included everything through the design of a project that they would support on. So they have an opportunity to provide input on constructability of the project and give us pricing while we're in design, so we know where we're at with the overall budget. We can identify if we need more money or if we need to cut scope. So for each of these projects that we complete design and we're ready to go into construction, we negotiate the price with Granite, and then we enter into these phase 2 amendments, we call them. So we now have 7 amendments that have been approved to date. The most recent was the Tooele bike lanes. And then the next one coming up would be for the Midvale crosswalk. But yeah, so each of those, even though they're an amendment, it's starting off the construction phase of that particular project. We might have projects grouped together, say like for Farmington, we have 4 projects to complete there. That'll be one agreement to cover the 4 projects. And having Granite do all that work at the same time saves us money as well.
Just with Granite Construction, with the CMGC type of contract that we set up with them, we actually brought them on first and let them review all the projects to determine which ones they actually needed that design help. A lot of the ADA access ramps in Bountiful, like say you give them a specification and meet the city engineer out there, and they can go ahead and build them and don't necessarily need a design engineer to design all of those. And so they were involved a lot with that. and it made sense to just have one contractor be able to do all of the work. I mean, they do have different subs that will help them out in different projects, but they're able to do all of that. So they've been a great partner with us, not just during the design, but also during the construction part as well.
Okay. So here's some information on where we're at today. We've completed 69 projects to date. The majority of those are the ADA ramps in Bountiful, and there are some in Farmington as well. And then we've completed some bike lane projects in South Jordan, Harriman, and Draper, and then some sidewalk projects in Farmington. There's 2 projects that had started construction last year and kind of were put on hold for the winter, and they are wrapping up now. One is bike lane project in Ogden, and the other is a multi-use path, and that's Parley's Trail that's in South Salt Lake City on the Sugar House line.
Oh no, I'm having mic issues this morning. Sorry. Can you explain the difference between a bike lane and a multi-use path? Like, what is that difference?
So the paths are generally wider and can accommodate, people walking, people running, people riding their bikes all in one trail. So like the bike lane project up in Ogden that we have a picture of there, it's kind of like a promenade style, but there's a division between the sidewalk and the bike lanes themselves. So
I was also going to say, because this was a question I had a few years ago when Salt Lake City redid North Temple and did the wider sidewalks. It's also, if a bicyclist is on that, they're not going to go at the 20 mile or 15 mile an hour speeds that you might if you were on the road. It's more of a casual ride.
With that, in Ogden, you can see up next to the parking garage, there is the sidewalk. And like I said, there's a delineation between the sidewalk up against the parking garage versus the concrete bike path versus the asphalt travel lane versus that South Salt Lake is a, 12-foot wide concrete path that is for the bikes, strollers, anything that wants to use it, non-motorized.
So I guess, and my next question to that is, so anytime someone says bike lane, typically that's what's going to look like. It's going to have maybe a little divider, then there's going to be a sidewalk, and then a multi-use path is typically 12 feet in width, or
Not
is that,
necessarily.
it's not necessarily.
It's
Okay.
just the definition. I mean, we're doing some bike lanes where I believe the bike lanes in Tooele is just striping,
Yeah.
the road.
Okay.
That you put in a thicker paint stripe with the bike symbol in a 4 or 5 foot wide lane on the side of the road.
Okay.
That's a bike lane. So the definition depends on.
On the scope of the project?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
yeah, I mean, this bike lane here in Ogden, it's considered a bike lane, but like Grace said, the Tooele bike lanes, they're a different type of bike lane, but we're still have them in the same category when we report to FDA. So coming up, I mentioned the bike lanes in Tooele. So we have that phase 2 agreement in place with Granite Construction, but the city has a project going on right now, so that'll start in the fall. The Midvale Crosswalk project, we're just finalizing the pricing now, and then that agreement would come to you guys. And then we have already started just this week the bike share project in Summit County. So Granite Construction, they started on one of the stations in Park City. And then we're currently working on a overhead pedestrian bridge in Lehigh. And then we're working on the multi-use path in Sandy, which is south of the Sandy Civic Center track station. And we've just started design on the Folsom Trail with Salt Lake City. And we have a crosswalk project in Farmington that Farmington's actually doing the design, and they're finalizing that right now. And we'll include that with some other Farmington projects to go into construction for Granite. And then we're working with Green Bike on their bike share project as well. So finalizing design there so that we can get the design to the the bike share manufacturer, and then we'll get that order placed. That's it. Do you guys have any questions?
Any questions from members of the board? That was a great update. Thank you. And thanks for your work on it
Thank you.
and your patience in working with our partners. So that's great.
Thank you very much.
All right. So next up, I wanted to give you an update on the Half Grand Union, the Main Street project. And I think we got Eddie Cummins and Greg Thorpe to give you an update on that. We could ask the chair for an update. He was probably out there most recently. Pulled his shift last night.
I'll add my ad to it after you're done.
In addition to that, Trustee Millington and I were out there Monday morning, so he has some insight as well. Overall, things are going well so far. In regards to an update, tracks construction for Phase 1 continued with welding and elevating the switches. Drainage to the switch machines was completed earlier this week. Installation of track signaling conduits from the turnouts to the handholds has progressed. Contractors currently pulling wire back to the new signal house. Rebar installation began yesterday afternoon, so as Trustee Millington and I saw out there, they had all the track elevated. They'll be putting rebar underneath that and pouring concrete, and while we were there, we kind of got a little insight into how that operation works. Absolutely. Saw cutting for the start of Phase 2 is expected to be completed today, so they'll start to cut out the concrete areas and get ready for demolition in that area. Contractor is currently planning to pour Phase 1 concrete Thursday morning. And the good news is that this project is on schedule and progressing well. And I think I have a few pictures. Do we have a few pictures up there? So some really good high definition pictures that were taken. Kind of shows the track. The picture over on the right is a picture looking up for south to the east. But really nice, and really can kind of see what's going on there. As I mentioned with the rebar, obviously they'll put rebar underneath the track before they pour the concrete to make sure that that's reinforced. And here's just an aerial picture of the demolition. From what I understand, they expected the demolition, they expected whenever they broke up the concrete for it to come out in bigger chunks. But as you can see, it's coming up in smaller chunks, so that took us a little bit of extra time. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Rather than big chunks, it was gravel. And is there one more? And then here's just another view of kind of that construction area from an aerial view.
So we'll be pouring concrete the next 3 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, to close this up, and then they'll move on to the next segment. The forecast is not for rain. Keep your fingers crossed. If it rains, we do have a problem pouring concrete, so it would cause an issue with the schedule. But right now it looks like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Mother's Day is good weather, so we're lucky. We have a daily call every day at 8:30 with all of our rail operations, customer service, UDOT, Salt Lake City, to talk about any issues. There are a few issues with our patrons being confused on where to go, but we have the volunteers on the platforms. We're always making adjustments on the signage to take care of that, so we're adjusting those daily. Some people at the airport are confused about where the trains are going. So we're handling that with announcements through the airport. So we're dealing with things as they come up. So UDOT's very happy with the traffic flows downtown, so we're glad about that. Salt Lake City's had no complaints at all. We have had one complaint with customer service from one person who had 10 complaints. And so far we're doing pretty well. So it was somebody that was confused on where a Green Line train was going. So if we get less than 1,000 complaints, I think we've had success. So we're only one right now, so we're very good.
One question. So they sent out a call for volunteers for last night, and I signed up for it. And it was not heavy traffic, but I was surprised how many people are still. I was there till just after 11, and working with a saint named Tyler Daybell, who I guess is a operations supervisor. Anyway, he put up with me for 3 hours, and we now know extensive information about each other's family. But and I jokingly thought we should have platform karaoke, just to entertain ourselves if you're on the night shift. But you won't be able to hear yourself sing, which would make it better because of the jackhammering. But they said, one worker said that the material underneath was, or something underneath was a little different than they had anticipated. And I just wondered if you knew what that was or what happened. And
Now, the concrete's thicker than they anticipated, so that's why it's coming out in chunks. When they saw cut down to 8 inches, the concrete is so heavy, the panels, they can't pick it up with their machinery. So that's why they're having to break it up more than it is. They will be bringing in road base to bring it up a little bit, so they don't have to pour so much concrete back. So that was the only issue they've come across so far. With the jackhammering, we did break out some windows at the Washington Federal Building. So now they're putting sound panels in front of the jackhammering so the concrete doesn't spall and hit the windows. So we did have that happen. We did have a bus hit at one of our variable message signs coming westbound on 4 South. That's been taken care of. So we'll fix that issue. So we do have some things that it's a moving target out there. So everything's going well, I would say.
I was super impressed it was
Yeah.
moving along as fast as it was, all things considered.
It's a good idea to hand out the water. Everybody seems to like the little water jugs we're handing out. It's like only about 6 ounces to 8 ounces. So
Yeah.
that's working well.
I was surprised even last night people were taking them, and it was a good gesture.
Right.
I had a quick question, just out of curiosity. The concrete scenario where it was deeper than expected, is that because of the way it was poured initially? Was that was a design requirement, and then subsequently, engineering became better, or how did that?
No, I think that's just the hurry up to get it ready for the Olympics pouring sequence.
Oh, okay.
So this was a hurry up job to do to get the ready
So
for
to
the
try and
Olympics.
get everything in place. Oh, that makes sense. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Great, thank you. Last item, you toss me the clicker. I want to give you an update on grants. And we've been busy in the grants group and with the rest of the organization working on the grants. We've been going through a process with the MPOs. They've been programming their congestion mitigation, air quality, STP, TAP funds for the outgoing years. They're always, I think Mountain Lands does it every other year and Wasatch Front does it every year. So out of that program, you see there about $27.9 million from Wasatch Front for various projects. Mountain Lands about $8.5 million. And a big one, $4,500 from the National Police Dog Foundation. So we'll be adding another dog to our police department. And we're looking forward to that. We have $16 million in 2018 proposals where we've selected, and we're under the process to get those grants under contract. And you see those 3 items there, the 5339B. This is the part of the federal code that allocates these funds. So for the bus and bus facilities, for the depot district, we were awarded $11 million last year. 5339 no grant for electric buses for the Park City, Salt Lake City connection. And then this FRA, we got a lot of acronyms here, so we write that down.
Steve, if you don't know them, we won't.
Yeah, I didn't write that one down. It's for PTC, for
Okay.
Positive Train Control on Freelancer, so that's to help us out with that effort.
Steve, I had a quick question just on the past one. This is more just a question about the facilities for the electric buses up in Park City side. Their initial charging station was taken out in an accident. How does that impede anything? Does it delay implementation or anything like that, or did they
No,
get that
they're
addressed?
going ahead and mitigating. They were in the process of mitigating that, so getting that repaired. So that won't have any impact for the project. They'll have that done by the time we get done, or get those new buses procured. Let's see. So we got this still pending grants, 77.37 million. So 49.75 for the application in for the small starts for the Ogden BRT. So we've been approved into project development, and we'll keep moving through that process. We've got some, we'll get the designers underway this year and continue to advance that project and work through the steps to get towards that small starts grant. We applied for 26.2 million in the Utah VW settlement funds, and we're working on 27 UTA buses, so a replacement and eight buses with Park City. So we expect that decision anytime.
What kind of buses are you anticipating in the acquisition?
Anybody? Electric?
I mean, that's what I was assuming.
Yeah. Helps to have good backup in the crowd. So there, 1.4 million now. Here we got some acronyms going here. We got FTA. This is ICAM, Innovative Coordinated Access and Mobility, and HSCR, Human Services Coordinated Research. So this voucher program with all the transportation, the human resource people, agencies around that provide access service. So an e-voucher, so you can use available resources. So people have more access, and this is a pilot project for that. So we're excited about that one.
Does that pilot project, is that system wide, or is it only in certain areas? How would that work?
I believe the entire area would have access to that. It's just for those vans, so that we provide, as well as that shelters and other service providers have vans,
Right.
for elderly services. Then grants applications in development. What we see later on today with the finance policy, that I am required to notify you of any grant applications over $200,000. So we did want to get you updated on that. But the build grant, we're looking at opportunities for the future of Front Runner that could tie in with our work in Vineyard, and perhaps some additional double track work for Front Runner. Another low-no grant with Park City for the 2 additional buses. The original grant that we have, we got a haircut on that, so Park City got their buses, but we didn't get ours. I think this is the 2 electric buses that would run from Park City to Salt Lake. Another grant application for 5339 for bus facilities for bus stops. A FEMA Transit Security Grant Program for various security improvements. And then, we continue to look at these CMAQ STP grants and FTA TOD planning grant tied in with the future of Front Runner. What do we need in some of those locations with TOD, and because many of our parking lots are at capacity, looking at opportunities to design plan for parking structures, those locations. And this just gives you a summary of ongoing federal funding that we receive annually by the formula fund programs that FTA has in place. And I'll go through all those, but we do get quite a group, very active. They meet monthly to review the status of the grants with the different departments involved, making sure we're up to date, getting reimbursed in a timely basis, meeting the requirements, and importantly for FTA, getting the grants closed out on a timely basis. They get evaluated from headquarters in the regions by how timely we spend down those dollars. So federal government grants us that money, we want to spend that in a timely manner. Any questions?
Any questions from the board?
Great.
That was a very helpful update. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. That concludes my report for today.
Thank you. Next up is a consideration of a resolution authorizing the execution of an interlocal agreement with Utah County. And Ken, do you want to talk to us about some work you've been working on the last
All right.
year or two?
A few months ago, Utah County approved the fourth quarter increase in sales tax for that included some funding for transit. They wanted an interlocal agreement and a service level agreement with UTA to ensure that the funds that would be made available through that sales tax increase in Utah County would be appropriately applied to projects that would include the approval and review and approval by the Utah County Commissioners. And so that interlocal agreement, service level agreement, has been prepared. We've had some iterations of that agreement over the last 2 or 3 months since I've been in place. Beth was kind enough to get that whole process started late last fall. And then we've worked through the agreement. The agreement includes a process, the service process and the capital projects processes that the county would be involved in early on in the approval of those activities that would include the funding that's made available by the sales tax. And so they have, the Utah County has considered that in their commission meeting yesterday. They were, I have not heard final word that it was approved, but that was up for their consideration yesterday. But verbally, early in the week, I was told that they expected to pass that yesterday. So we have an opportunity now to approve it from our side so that we can sign this service level agreement and have it in place. This is a process for reviewing and approving the projects and the services that we offer through Utah County to include the first quarter, second quarter, and fourth quarter funds that are made available through the sales tax. Fairly short, to the point, but it gives them some comfort and us some comfort as well. Included in the agreement is some reporting requirements that we reviewed with our financial people, and they said that we could meet those reporting requirements for the funding that's made available and how it's used, as well as the ridership that we've been sharing the last several months with Utah County.
Great, thank you. Any questions either for Kent or anybody else? Well, thank you for your work with that. I understand you've had some productive conversations that have got us to this point, and certainly to Beth for, early on.
Getting that started.
Working
Absolutely.
through that. So to both of you, thank you for your efforts here. Seeing no other questions, entertain a motion for approval of this resolution.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion that we approve the execution of the interlocal agreement with Utah County.
I will happily second that.
We have a motion and a happily seconded as a second. And any discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Next item up is item 8, contracts and pre-procurement. And the first one is a contract for bus lifts for the Meadowbrook and Ogden facilities. Eddie?
Hello again. This is, as you mentioned, Chair Christensen, this is for new bus lifts to replace aging.
I think your mic is going out. Just maybe swap with the one next to you. There.
Is that better?
Yeah.
That sounds better. So this is for new bus lifts to replace aging and existing lifts. Total contract is $366,711. The requested equipment is part of our State of Good Repair Plan. These new lifts will be installed in Ogden and Meadowbrook garages. The current lifts are over 30 years old and have reached the end of their lives. The Ogden lift will be a 3-post, 90,000-pound lift, which is set up to lift our larger MCI buses. And the ones at Meadowbrook would be a 60,000-pound lift that's just used for, a typical 40-foot bus. The new lifts are environmentally friendly. As you can imagine, technology and design has advanced significantly over the past 30 years. These new lifts, they use 3.5 gallons of hydraulic fluid that's stored above ground for each piston, so 3.5 gallons per piston, where our other older system had 250-gallon reservoir with an underground supply and return lines. So much, much different and much more environmentally friendly. Also, and our mechanics will be very happy because these new lifts are also faster and much easier to use. So that's it. Any questions?
I just had a quick question. So when would this be implemented and completed?
We would start on it probably by the end of the year. The plan would be to get them installed by the end of the year. This is something we do on a regular basis. So it's, as you guys have toured the facilities, you know that every bay just about has a lift in it. And so over the years, we've been replacing them, just 2 or 3, 4 a year.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion on this particular contract.
I move that we approve the contract for the bus lifts for Meadowbrook and Ogden.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next item up is an information item, and it's regarding the Census 2020, and would invite some former colleagues from Salt Lake County to join us. Zizi Zhao and Karen Hale, who would have been here, but I understand is a little under the weather. And before I left Salt Lake County, we were working with Z and her staff in the mayor's office on the upcoming census, and looking for collaboration. I thought this would be a good conversation for us to have as a board, and maybe what role we might be able to help in providing good information. So, Z, you want to?
Yeah. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much. Like a caution said, my name is Zeman Sao. Just call me Z for short. Easier for everyone. And I direct office for New Americans for Salt Lake County Mayor Jenny Wilson. And this is my colleague.
Marty Wolford. Nice to meet you all.
So first, I just want to thank the chair, Christensen, for inviting us today to share with you about what we're doing in terms of Census 2020. This is a once in a decade, test that all of us have to do. So I'm happy to share with you what we are doing in Salt Lake County and how we might be able to partner with UTA. So this is Census 2020, You Matter Be Counted. That is the state tagline for us to use. The state of Utah has a complete count committee, and the complete count committee is putting into putting the not graphics, but the logo together. As you can see, Utah Census 2020, and the tagline is You Matter Be Counted. And this is actually specific to Salt Lake County, some of the marketing materials we have put together. So I'm just going to go over this really quickly because I know you guys know about the census. I just want to highlight a couple of points. So what's the census? Is once in a decade that counts everyone living in the country. A couple of things I really want to highlight is that this is the actual count of individuals in housing units and not just a sampling. There is also the community service, community surveyed that also is administered by the Census Bureau, but this is different. And this particular census really provides the baseline for everything else the Census Bureau does. So this is really, really important. Again, and I know that you guys all know about this. Why does the census matter? We just went through the grants. We get a lot of money from the federal government based on the census numbers. We rely on the census numbers for planning, political representation, so on and so forth. I'm not going to go into too much details about that. although I do want to highlight one thing, that with the growing demographics in Salt Lake County, it's really important for us to make sure that we know who is living in our communities. This is just some numbers. $5 billion, over $5.5 billion federal funding is based on the census numbers. This is the 2016 numbers. In the state of Utah, we received $18 billion. Is it? Oh, sorry. Let me take that back. So it's approximately about $2,000, $1,870 per person that every resident in Salt Lake County receives based on the federal fundings. If we miscount 1,000 people, that's $18 billion coming to a state per year. So we're talking about a lot of money if we don't count everyone. Also want to just provide you a schedule overview of what the Census 2020 looks like. From now to spring 2020 is really preparing for the count, educating about the census purpose and value in the community. That's why we're doing it so early on. The census is not till 2020, but we need to prepare and educate the community about the importance of the census. Spring 2020 is really the time to motivate people to participate. Now that we have educated them about why this is important, we need to motivate and make sure that they fill out the census. Census Day is April 1st, 2020. Yeah, we asked the census director that. He's actually in town yesterday, and no. Yeah. From May to July 2020 is the follow-up stage where we are really following it and making sure that if people are not filling it out, they go and make sure that they fill it out, and I'll go into that a little bit more. December 2020 to March 2021 is when the Census Bureau will be releasing the data, or scheduled to release the data. This is a little more in-depth for census. So between March 12th to 20th is when residents will receive a mailing in the mail asking them to complete the census. Between March 16th and 24th, follow-up letters will send to those who doesn't respond. So as you can see, this is even before April 1st, which is Census Day. You will be receiving something in the mail prior to the Census Day asking you to complete the information. And on Census Day, that's really the day that we push really hard and say, this is Census Day, make sure you complete it. If you don't respond by March 24th, the Census Bureau will send out another reminder postcard saying that you need to fill out the census. If you don't respond, they'll continue to follow up. There's actually 4 follow-ups until they send out a numerator to knock on your door and ask you to respond to census. So there's some follow-up counts after after that day as well. So that's kind of a brief timeline of what we're expecting for 2020. Want to also talk about a little bit about the challenges for the 2020 census. The 2020 census, this is the first time that the Census Bureau will be encouraging everyone to complete their census online. This is not the only way you can fill out your census, but that is what the Census Bureau is encouraging everyone to do. So how it works is that the Census Bureau will send out a postcard in the mail asking you to go online and complete the census. They will also give you an option to call in a number, and that number will you will get a live person. That person on the other line will be able to speak in 16 different languages, so there is some language capacity there. And then they will also give you an option to ask for a paper form if you're not comfortable in filling the census online. That is a great opportunity for a lot of folks, but also some challenges for some of our residents. It's going to be confusing. People are confused right now or whether or not how this is going to work. Do we need to fill it online? We call people, how is this going to work? And asking for, it just puts too many steps for people to be able to complete the census. So that is a challenge for 2020. Budget constraint is another issue. Although like I mentioned, the census director was in town yesterday and we had a great roundtable discussion with him, and he said the budget is actually right on point, but there is critiques in the community who disagree, and that there's a lot more we need to do in terms of preparing a community about Census 2020, especially given the challenges that we foresee. Local communities also is investing. Salt Lake County invested $240,000 in census, thanks to Carlton's work at the county at the time. But the state of Utah and the legislature did not approve any funding to support census. So we are left with really not much resources at this point from the state level. So that's another challenge. Distrust distrust of the process and privacy concerns is another big thing. Many of you know about the census, the citizenship question, which is still on debate. We're expecting a response from the Supreme Court by July to know whether or not if that question will be on the census. That puts a lot of anxiety in a lot of residents. Right now, there are certain groups of residents who will not said that they will refuse to answer to census if that question is on. Filling out the census online also provides other obstacles for other residents, including senior citizens who are familiar or trusting of the internet. So that is another challenge that we're facing.
See, I apologize. Can I get a quick question for you?
Yeah.
Back to the other
Yes.
slide. Declining response rates. So the census is already declining in response rates. Is that
There's some focus groups that the census is doing a lot of focus groups and trying to find out what the response rates are. And so they're anticipating a higher non-response rate for the 2020 census.
a little
Yeah.
less response? Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. So hard to count communities, there are a lot of hard to count communities in Salt Lake County and in other counties as well. Although in the 2010 census, Salt Lake, Utah as a whole has really high response rates. Actually, it's higher than a lot of other states. But if you look within those numbers, there are all pockets within Salt Lake County and in other places as well, where the unresponse rate is a lot higher in certain areas. So we really need to focus on those areas and make sure that we go into those communities and educate the population about why this is so important. And those communities we call hard to count communities. It includes people from 0 to 5. A lot of times people don't understand that you have to count a baby, which is really important. So we need to educate people about the 0 to 5 age group. Senior citizens is another one that we really need to educate and tell them about why this is important. Certain underserved communities, especially minorities and immigrants and refugees, are also part of the hard to count communities. The homeless is another one, and guess what? College students. Do I count them with my parents or do I count myself? So there's a lot of unknowns and misinformation out there.
You left us hanging there. How do they get counted?
I have college students, so how do they get counted?
Yeah, Marty will answer that question.
So if they live in housing, student housing on campus, they'll be counted as part of group quarters counting. So group quarters will be prisons, jails, homeless shelters, nursing facilities, dormitories, anywhere that people live in groups. If a college student is in an apartment that they are living on their own, then they would need to respond to their own census. If they are home on April 1st and they plan to be there for the rest of the summer, then you would count them with yours. So the April 1st date is very important because it's a question of where will you be on April 1st, 2020, and that's where you should be counted. So if they're visiting, but they really live in another state going to college, they would census from that other state. That's where they live most of the time.
Yeah.
Does that answer it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks. I that explains a lot, and it also highlights some of the challenges. So thanks.
Thank you. So I want to tell you a little bit about what Salt Lake County is doing to make sure that we ensure that an accurate count for all county residents in 2020. And we're doing 4 things. The first thing we're doing is really updating addresses. This is a really important task, making sure that if your address is not on the master address file, you won't get a postcard in the mail telling you to complete the census. So we want to make sure that every address is on that master address file. If you think about all the growth on the south end of Salt Lake County in Riverton and Harriman, there is a new housing unit that goes up almost every single day, if not more. So making sure that those houses addresses are on that master address file, that those residents receive a census card is really important. The other thing that's important is that because of knowing housing is an issue in a community, there are a lot of families who are living in unconventional households. Last year around this time, Jenna and Carlton actually worked with us on canvassing the neighborhoods and identifying those unconventional units to add to the master address file so that everyone gets counted, and we'll continue to do that from now till the end of the year. The second thing we're doing is coordination with local, state, and national efforts. There's a lot of efforts going on in the community, and we want to make sure that we're all coordinated. There are very limited resources, like we mentioned before. Who is doing what? How does the census work? There's a lot of information, new information coming out. For example, how do you count an individual who's in college? So we want to make sure that we're really coordinated in that effort. We are part of the state's Complete Count Committee. We're working closely with the Census Bureau and also local partners in the community as well. And so this is really important as a Salt Lake County, as a regional government. We want to make sure that all the jurisdictions within Salt Lake County are sharing the same information to all the residents. Number 3 is Complete Count Committee. We have 4 Complete Count Committees for Salt Lake County. We have a outreach committee who is really talking about how do you outreach the community and educate the community about the importance of the census. We have a resource subcommittee who is identifying resources we'll need to support the community to participate in the census. There's an enumerator subcommittee as well. And going back to the census director who was in town and the regional director who was in town, one of the comments that the regional director made that resonated with me was that she said the thing that keeps her awake at night is that she will not be able to fill all the enumerator positions for 2020 census. We have a very low unemployment rate. As we said earlier, the cell response rate is expected to be lower than in previous year, which means that we need to hire a lot more people knocking on doors. And how do you get the people to apply for those part-time jobs is really critical. So one of the things we really need to do is prepare a community and encourage our community to apply for those jobs, because if they don't get those jobs filled, people is not going to fill up the census, and which is going to be a challenge for our community. So that's really important that we're focusing on. What was the 4th one that I totally forgot now? The cities and townships also have a subcommittee. We meet regularly with all of the cities and just making sure that we are working together on that. Salt Lake County is creating all of the marketing materials that we're able to share with all of the cities with the resources that we have available. So cities, counties, nonprofit organizations are able to go on our website, slco.org/census. You'll be able to download all the information, fact sheets about the census, as well as request materials and information from us. Information and community engagement. We're working with trusted community-based organizations to make sure that we're getting the word out to those communities. We're doing a special campaign for the immigrant community, a special campaign for the refugee community, one for the senior citizens, and another one for the youth, 0 to 5. So next slide, opportunities for UTA to get involved. I guess that's why Carlton invited me here today. So the first, from now to spring 2020, is all about preparing and educating the community. We need to let the community know the importance of the census. Many people still don't know about the census. Changing demographic, we have a lot of newcomers in the community who might not have participated in the census in the past. So it's really important that we need to prepare and educate them from now to the spring of 2020. What UTA can do is UTA employees could sign up and become a member of the Complete Count Committee. There is a Complete Count Committee from the state level, Complete Count Committees in the county level, as well as the city level. So you can choose to participate in any of those Complete Count Committees. The other thing you can do is really educate your employees about the importance of the census. We're doing this with other businesses and nonprofits as well, newsletters, flyers in the break rooms, and just educating about your employees about the importance of the census and make sure that they know and they participate in the census. The other thing you should also do is UTA writers and your customers, educate them about the census, and there's various ways you guys could do that. You guys have a lot of interactions with customers. We have some really creative ideas coming from our marketing internal communication team within Salt Lake County. For instance, our the Echoes Theater wants to print out just one line on the tickets when they send out the tickets with theaters. It's like, census is coming. Make sure you understand that. So I think there's lots of clever ways that you can educate your customers about the census. And then from spring 2020 on is really motivating, encouraging people to do it. Again, you can do that with your employee as well as your customers. Some of the things that you can do is message on your paychecks. I know that most of us don't get paychecks anymore, it's direct deposits, but that's an example of it. You can also create a census day event within UTA. The same thing you can also do with your writers in various places, and just encouraging them that they need to participate in the census and the importance of census. And that's what we have prepared today.
Thank you, Z and Marty. Any questions? Okay.
I do have one question. If the citizenship question turns out to be on the census and you do not respond to that, are you not counted?
You want to answer that?
So what we're hearing is an almost complete questionnaire response will be counted. So if you don't respond to one or two questions, you'll still be counted.
Okay. So I won't disappear because I'm not going to answer that question if it shows up.
Okay.
Kids are rebel by nature, so
You can tell.
civil disobedience, I love it.
I have a question. Are your compatriots in other counties doing something similar to this as well? And if you know about it, because obviously our system goes through multiple counties, and if we, when we partner with you and have that information, are a lot of the counties doing the same thing?
Yes, they're all complete count committees in most of the cities, in the city level, not so much so from the county level.
So like Davis and Utah County or Weber County, do you know if they?
I know Ogden City has a complete count committee that's active in meeting.
Okay.
I don't believe Weber is a part of that effort yet.
Okay.
I know Utah County, I think, has one as
Utah
well.
County has one.
The Census Bureau has been very engaged at the local level with counties and cities to help them start complete count committees, and we can put you in touch with the employees who are over your counties that you work with. But they know who's on board, who maybe needs a little extra help getting one formed. I would say Salt Lake County, though, is by far leading out with this.
Okay. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Ken?
Yes, thank you very much for that, because I represent Utah County, where we have about close to 70,000 college students.
Mm-hmm.
And so that'll be really important to get the word out there. You've prompted my thoughts to do some checking there to make sure that's active in Utah County. Thank you.
And I see that you're with Tooele County, and I believe you're all of Tooele County is considered hard to count, whereas in Salt Lake County we have pockets. So Tooele has some different barriers with being more rural. I believe all of Tooele will get a hand-mailed questionnaire, whereas in Salt Lake County people will get a postcard to go online. So there's differences based on county. There's maps.
Okay. Thank you
so
for that. I'm meeting with the
definitely-
commissioners out there in a couple of weeks, and I will, I'll add this to my list of things
Yeah.
to just talk to them.
That's
So
great.
what about Box Elder? Say, so I represent Davis Weber and Box Elder. Are they doing anything that you're aware of? Are they hard to count?
It'd be similar.
I'd have to
I'm
go
thinking
back
it might
and
be
look at
similar.
the map, but I feel like a lot of Box Elder residents will also get the questionnaire hand delivered, is how they're
Yeah.
referring to it. But I'd be happy to pass on a map that you can look at and see how each area in the whole entire state is being targeted. But I honestly didn't look past Weber.
No, that's fine. Thanks. It's helpful in the extreme because I'm sure, I know we want to make sure that our counties and cities in those areas are being as responsive as possible. So thanks.
The other thing that we could also help you with, I mean, Salt Lake County, we've been doing and focusing on census for over a year now. So we are partnering with both national nonprofits, alliances, the Census Bureau, in just tracking up to date on all of the things that's going on related to Census 2020. So use us as a resource. But the other thing that we could have is that if you do decide to target certain populations, we could help you identify which route you should. If you decide to do some marketing, we could help you identify which route your buses go to that would target those hard to count communities. So we have a lot of those resources available.
Steve, maybe if we can think about, and maybe if there's some staff that would be key focus that could help us coordinate, what things can reasonably be done, both our policy and our normal course of outreach, where we could find some synergies, that would be great.
Sure. Look at opportunities to talk to our customers as well as our employees.
Yeah, so I will certainly try to collaborate with you and appreciate all the efforts you've made thus far, and certainly want to make sure our messages align. I think that's important. So thanks for taking time to be with us.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you both.
Thank you.
So, we'll move on to, we'll do item B, and then I think we'll take a quick break. But let's move to the executive team performance metrics, follow up, Steve. And
Thank you, Chair. We appreciate the efforts that the board has made to have your retreat and look at your strategic objectives and communicate that to our staff. We gave you a first blush of that, and then you presented where you're at, and then now we want to respond back and show you how we've modified some of our approaches to our goals for 2019 with respect to your strategic objectives. Who's got the clicker? Eddie's first.
Hey, thank you. So after reviewing the board's priorities, that you spoke about last week, I feel like we're very well aligned with these proposed COO goals. So the first one up there is to meet or exceed all Chief Operating Officer key performance indicators. This is the sheet that I showed you once before. I've made some adjustments on that based on your feedback, but it now includes 8 key performance indicators separated into 4 different categories. Those categories are efficiency and effectiveness, service quality, safety and security, and asset management. And I'll go more in depth on that on the next slide and show you what the new scoreboard looks like. Successfully implement new service is the number 2 goal. As mentioned last time, we have a lot of new service on the horizon. We have the Salt Lake City service. We have new service in Weber County starting in August, Tooele County, and then we also have that South Salt Lake Microtransit pilot project. Third goal is meet 2019 operating budget. It's always a challenge. We're always looking to improve our system, but we always have to make sure that all the decisions we make stay within our proposed budget. develop a 5-year capital and state of good repair plan with associated funding strategy. That's something that we've been working on extensively over the past few months and really making a lot of progress in regards to that goal. And then implement initiatives to support a strong organizational culture focused on employee development and retention. That's a big one. That's a shared goal, a shared objective with the people office, and it's one that we're working to make sure that we can make things the best we possibly can. Obviously, we know the key to success is having a strong organizational culture, so that's what we're working on. We can just take a look. So, as I said, based on your feedback, removed a few of the KPIs that were on here. There are some things that I think at the board level probably appeared to be leading indicators. They're critically important to the business units and myself to make sure that we stay, within budget and that we're looking at the right things. But overall, I think that this is the right approach at this level to report to the board. So as you can see in efficiency and effectiveness, we have our expense, which is our budget. On-time performance, average weekday boardings, so always looking at how we're doing on boardings from that perspective. Service quality, looking at our road calls on the bus side and what we refer to as service interruptions on the rail side. Just to talk a little bit about especially the rail service interruptions, that's a goal that we may look at adjusting in the near future. At this time last year, we were really struggling with the implementation of PTC. We set a goal for this year to improve by 20%, but year to date, we've improved 125%. So with just some of the adjustments that we've made to the schedule, some things that we put in place, doing root cause analysis, really getting smarter on how to, when something does happen, how to keep that from cascading and causing more problems in the system. We've really improved a lot in that area. So that's a goal that we may have to adjust as the year goes on. Safety and security. Bus avoidable accidents. If you saw last month when we were here talking about this, we've improved. We're going in the right direction on this one. Still red in that area, but we're making improvements. Fair inspection rate. This is a newly added one with the bringing in the transit police, and as you can see, they're doing quite well in that area. And then asset management, looking at preventative inspections. This is one of those areas where we have internal goals, right? This is an FRA mandate. We have to have these preventative inspections done on a 30-day period. So for this, we report on which we're at 100%. The goal's 100%. We're at 100%. But internally, we have that set up on a 28-day cycle so that we can make sure that we're really looking ahead, trying to get things done early. That way, if we're running a little bit behind, we have time to catch up in those last 2 days. And so with that internal goal, we're about 5% behind right now, but continuing to look at ways to improve that process. Any questions?
Any questions? I love it, by the way.
Thank you.
I think it is spot on and it's very helpful.
Great, thank you.
So next we'll talk about the Chief Financial Officer. The goals have remained the same. What I've provided here is the current status. So establishing fair strategy with the board. First discussions scheduled for May 22nd. We'll be getting you some information ahead of that time. We've been working on the joint agency inventory contracts. You approved the one for the bus. We're negotiating the one with the rail. Hopefully we'll be able to get back with you soon on that. I've already heard that the bus one is already looking good. We may be coming back to you with a pleasant surprise and asking to increase that contract to include additional parts. You know that the TOD system analysis tool has been completed and it was used to select the three TOD sites. The Clearfield RFP has been issued. It's out on the street. We're working on the other two that need to get out on the street. Sandy phases 5 and 6, our site work is underway. If you've been out there, you've seen the garage. There's a hole out there where there's been a bunch of dirt taken out. And on site 5 near the State Street, there's a lot of dirt work going on there, moving a canal. And then the budget update process, Last week, we talked about that process and what that would look like. Today, we're going to talk about our first budget amendment and what that might look like and how that flows through the process. And then we have these key performance indicators internally that we're trying to meet. Fares, that's still a goal. We're working on developing and gathering data so we can report on what our uptime is. Supply chains, 95% or greater on parts availability. Last month, we were at 93.5%. And then we keep track of the vehicles that are out of service waiting for parts. As I recall, we're doing well on buses, on tracks cars, but the commuter rail cars were up at 8 right now.
Any questions for Bob? That's, again, I like it a lot. Thank you.
Hi. So the Chief People Office goals for 2019, they haven't changed, but we were happy to see that they align very closely to the board's employee relations priority. So just a quick review of those is we do have collective bargaining this year, and so we want to make sure that we can successfully get that done. We are working on hiring and training efforts and really trying to increase our training graduation rate to support our current and new service. We have some new leadership development process pieces that we're rolling out and a major focus on action planning from our engagement survey so that we can improve our internal relationships and focus on retention, and then continue rolling out our new clinic and our wellness program. And then our goal is to establish an employee health metric benchmark in 2020. I wanted to do a little bit of an update on where we are with those, recognizing that 2019 is really a baseline, a time for us to be creating some baseline metrics. And most of our goals here are focused on helping us do that. A big priority for us is our leadership assessment and seeing where our leadership development efforts need to be placed ongoing and how we can be better prepared for succession planning. So we have, I'm excited to point out that we have our first 4 cohorts of our Emerging Leaders program graduating in the next 30 days. That's been a really successful program, and we'll have some updates for Steve on that in a little bit. We'll also be conducting a talent assessment in the summer that's better focused on understanding how deep our leadership bench is and where our gaps are and where we need to really roll out some more training and some more mentoring and coaching in those areas. We're currently, right now as we speak, creating a retirement risk factor formula that we can apply to our current population. We're really looking at trend and seeing what factors have played into retirements over the last 5 years, and then we will apply that formula to our current workforce to see where we have the most risk for losing skill sets. And again, we can use that to help inform our development, our training, and succession planning efforts. And then, of course, we want to pay attention to the leadership categories that are being measured on the engagement survey. So we'll be looking over time as part of that engagement survey to see steady improvement, probably over a 2 to 3 year period. As we get in, I'm sorry, I'm not following these exactly, but as we get into the engagement survey, I wanted to talk a little bit based on feedback that I heard about our plans moving forward. We saw a 10.11% increase in participation on our engagement survey this year over 2018. And 2018 was the first time in 3 years we had done an engagement survey. And we did a very limited amount of work with that survey. We conducted the survey in January. We released the results in the spring, and then with all that was going on in the organization, we just communicated those results and then decided to survey in 2019. So we deployed that same survey. We did quite a few things to improve participation, and that was we added a text text, well, we improved the rate of people using the text option and the QR codes to help get that out there. For 2020, in January, we will resurvey again and hope to see a little bit above 50%. We are at 46% right now. I do want to point out that we do have a strong sample size with even our current data. It is very statistically valid and representative, but and actually a good number for our type of organization with a highly dispersed workforce. I also wanted to talk a little bit more about our leader ownership of employee engagement, and this speaks to some of the partnerships that we're doing with all of our organizational leaders on retention. So we know that engagement is a key piece of retaining our employees. And as we released the results to our senior leadership team, we wanted to create leader ownership in those results and what they were going to do to try to improve or sustain good engagement in their areas. So senior leaders are currently partnering with people from my staff, and they are conducting workshops with their employees around the results in each of their areas and talking about what the employees want to focus on to increase and sustain engagement in those areas. And so those sessions are going on as we speak, and all leaders should have those turned into their executive by the end of this month. And then once we have those, we will kind of aggregate and see where the focus should be for the organization as a whole and roll out more initiatives between now and the end of the year. We also plan to do a pulse survey in August or September on some key questions based on what we get back from those leader-led activities to see if we've made any kind of difference. That's a really short period of time, so I'm not expecting some huge increase, but at least we'd like to see if we can see something measurable. And then on that, again, in trying to focus on metrics and trying to show improvement, we've really focused on identifying our leading and our lagging indicators. And so our leading indicators are going to be our employee participation. How many leader-led sessions did we complete in 2019? How many action plans were developed and deployed and implemented? And then the pulse survey would be part of those. And moving forward, our longer-term lagging indicators would be the annual engagement survey result as a whole. We'll really want to look to see an uptick in that score over time, probably a 2 to 3 year period. And then quickly, just hopefully in summer, we'd like to bring back a presentation on the results of our health and wellness strategies over the last year as part of the executive director update, looking at maybe July for that. And then we also are continuously looking at our total rewards package. So part of that review in 2019 will be to evaluate those mental health benefits, just to ensure that we are competitive in the marketplace, we're keeping up with the employee need, and make adjustments to that if we see something there.
Any questions for Kim? I was just going to say, in my 3-hour interview last night of Tyler, I think you got lots of up-and-coming smart individuals that have potential to slide into these roles with some guidance and things. I like where this is moving to, so thank you.
I did have one other comment as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sure. Last night I was in Clearfield with, they were doing a service choices presentation for their mayor and council and their planning commission, which I thought was really a good use of that. One of the questions that came up, interestingly enough, is retention of employees. How are you going to, well, if we want to do a service choice of whatever, how are we going to get the employees? So I thought that's a great question for them to have asked. And so I appreciate hearing about some of these strategic ideas that you have in place to keep our employees. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm having some allergies, so I have this deep, deep voice. So excuse me if I sound a little husky this morning. So again, Chief Communications and Marketing Office. Again, our goals were really aligned, and we got to give you a little bit about our measurements last week with the benchmark survey. So some of this will sound a little bit of a duplication, but I want to kind of broaden it a little bit too. Our goals didn't change, but I'm going to do a deeper dive of some of the initiatives and give you an update, and then also kind of respond to some of the feedback we've heard over the last couple of months, and kind of what we've done to respond to that feedback. So again, making UTA more relatable, better customer and current future communications. How are we working with our partners on internal communications, putting the customer at the core of everything, and then meeting the transit needs for current and future generations, and with planning, and then how are we measuring these items as we go forward. One of the things you didn't hear in Eddie's measurements is ridership, right? So as you brought up as service choices, so I just want to talk about, as we look to our new chief coming on, and as you will be brought with service choices, our planning team will be talking about GTA, and please forgive me, Eric, if I say this wrong, but it's geographical temporal area that we'll be looking at, which measures KPI for coverage, and then we'll be looking at frequency, much easier for me to say, as we look at how we measure our frequency as an agency. So we will have a balance of our frequency routes and our coverage routes, and then bringing that to you as how we're looking at that as an agency to measure, are we meeting what you've asked us to do? So this isn't today, but it will be a KPI that the agency, we haven't forgotten about ridership. So that's a broader discussion for another day, but I don't want us to say that we have eliminated ridership measurement, right? So one of the things I wanted to just talk about is our overall identity. Last week we talked, and it's not on the slide, but last week we talked about 60% of the general public identifies with UTA, which is amazing, right? That's great. Our team is charged with continuing to strengthen our brand. So this includes updating our brand style and customer information standards. So this is what you see on our vehicles, what you see on our shirts, what you see in wayfinding on our bus stops. We're updating that right now. This is going to include something as simple as what Trustee Holbrook is, a standard signature. So really next week, I am going to come to our managers meeting and go out throughout our agency and really talk about being consistent throughout the agency with our brand. And that is to continue to strengthen that brand throughout. So we're really excited about that. And we're also going to include it, the transit glossary, which we have, but also look at customer-facing terminology, like what is a customer? What is a rider? What is, I think one of them was, what is GTA? What is frequency? What is coverage? Some of the new words that we have is microtransit. What is TNCs? So we're adding some new words to that glossary that have just come on board so we can work throughout our agency. But that's to holistically start talking about the brand of the agency. So that's some of the exciting things we're doing holistically. New initiatives that we're looking at. Some of the feedback we received is really looking at diversity and including those in our surveys and our measurements, and making sure that we're getting a balanced voice. So we'll be making sure that goes out in our RFPs and looking to include that in our documentation and make sure that that's an important segment of our information. We'll be instituting our segment market survey. Our timing was 2020. I'm concerned with the census. I'm concerned with a couple of other of our outreaches. So I'm going to go back and make sure that that's the right time. But that's still, we need to look at when we're going to do that. So right now it's 2020. It would be that first quarter, but now with the census, maybe it's together. Maybe it's early, but that's really when we would do it. Also, one of the things that was really exciting for me was your priority was public engagement, and that's exciting. So we're looking at, we have community relations staff right now, but we're looking to hire a community relations manager who takes that all together and works with our TOD team, our planning team, our government relations team, and looks at a strategic plan of how we're relating to that input. What does that look like? How we measure it, are we getting the right input, and also works with our board, our executive director, and our chiefs to make sure that we're really engaging with our public, like service choices. This is one of our biggest public input endeavors at UTA, and we're doing a great job. But it takes a lot. It takes a village, and we need to continue doing those kind of efforts. Benchmark survey. This year we'll be looking at questions that focus on specific goals, such as how do we measure, are we communicating better with our with the community? So those are going to be focus group questions, and we're implementing that, and this will be our baseline for this year. The same with, we'll be working with our team at the Chief People Office and really looking at how we better align our communications internally. These will be indirect measurements as we look at specific questions with them. I'll look to her team as experts to, as we do better communications with our staff, are we really moving the needle in the right direction on some of those engagements? So it's a 2 to 3 year kind of endeavor for us, but this is a new staff position, and we want to make sure that we're moving the collaboration and the increased engagement questions with the team. And they may change depending on Kim's assessment, but I want to make sure that as we help that team and communicate with our employees, that needle changes. So that's kind of the update for us. I'm looking for any questions that you may have.
Any questions from the board? A couple sort of quick thoughts I had. First of all, I definitely think you're in the right direction on things. And I remember painfully going through this in my last job where sort of the branding, I'm trying to think of a more kosher word, but the enforcers, got after everybody for their sort of one-off brands and finally got really some very consistent types of logos and signature blocks and those kind of things. They left a little part that at least identified the area you came from, because employees, if you're from the maintenance away group or something, you want to be able to sort of say that with a little bit of pride, and they figured out a way to sort of sub-categorize that, which sort of answered the question of, why can't we have our own logo? And so I think as you go through that process and figure out how you keep a little bit of pride from the unit pride
Absolutely.
to the overall, corporate messaging side, there's a win-win in that scenario. And, I think it can come in a variety of ways, but having some consistency there and, ultimately in vehicles as they transition or they're fixed up or whatever, you can get stuff, I think just helps long term. So.
Thank you.
Good. Let's see. Steve, anything else on that? Or?
I think that wraps it up. I, again, appreciate everyone's time. The team has put a lot of work into it.
I can tell, yes.
Appreciate the work of the board as well.
Yeah, great.
I think from the board standpoint, certainly from my standpoint, we appreciate very much the fact that you would go back and reconsider some of your goals and ideas based on our belated, because we're new to this, input. So thank you very much for reconsidering that and being sure that we're aligned properly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, let's take a break. I show it's about not quite 10:35. Let's maybe reconvene at, I'll say 10:40 so that we start by 10:45.
Jim? This year versus last? 215,000 up in buses.
Where'd you get that?
All right. We're gonna return to our agenda and to item C in our discussion items, a draft 2019 budget amendments. Bob?
Thank you very much. We talked about the process last week, and so this is the first budget amendment to come through. You've already talked about a few of these already in today's meeting, so we'll just go over these. We'll talk about the operating budget first, the Utah County fourth quarter money. That was not included in our budget. That was passed after the final budget was prepared last year. We have a TOD manager position. Paul's going to need some help with all the TOD activities going on, making sure that we do what we need to do to move those forward. Then in capital, we'll talk about some new projects. Excuse me, 3 of those are coming from grant opportunities that have been moved forward. And those are the 3 new projects. And then we'll talk about the 2018 carryover, which I mentioned last week. There's really 2 reasons. Sometimes the project scope has increased, or not scope, but the cost have increased. And sometimes we estimated how much we'd carry over from last year into this year, and that number's changed. So that's the nature of those. Let's start with the operating. Here's the Utah County fourth quarter. This represents the proposed amendment amount for sales tax represents 4 months collections this year. We begin receiving on July 1st. That's when we get our 1/10 of a cent, but we don't start receiving that until September. So there's always a 2-month lag there. And so that's my estimate just based upon the 4 months we would typically receive, July through, I guess that would be October. The operating support, right now Utah County from their third quarter provides us2.5 million for operating support. So since we're going to begin getting sales tax in September, this represents 1/3 of the operating support that they give us. That should stop when the sales tax begins. So the net increase in revenues is $2.2 million. So that is, excuse me, the first use of that is for the debt service. There's a cascading use of these sales tax dollars, with the first being debt service. Then it applies to the operating support. Then it goes to paying back Utah County for third quarter debt service, operations, interest on the operations. And then it's applied toward paying off the bonds early. And then we can look at what's in the SLA about new projects. So that's a little ways down the road.
Is the 2.2 million enough to cover the debt service?
That'll be just a little bit short of the November payment. It's like $100,000 short. We'll see what the actual revenues are, obviously, but you know, we'll make sure we make the payment to Utah County so they can pay their debt on November 1st, that particular payment. The next one's the TOD project manager. This is, again, someone to help Paul with all the TOD developments that are going on, to get the RFPs prepared, to get through the selection process, help put the agreements together, the master agreements, the operating agreements, all the planning that's involved in that, and then to actually make it happen. So there's a bunch of planning, and then there's a bunch of management of the actual activities and all the various phases.
And does the 68,000, I can't imagine that's the annual.
Correct. Thank you for asking. That's 7 months.
7 months. And do we have some level of confidence that that there's an annual income in there somewhere to cover the position on an ongoing
Correct.
basis?
So that's the other revenue in TOD. There's about $150,000 stream of revenue coming off of our current TOD projects. Okay. That's in addition to what we'd budgeted.
Okay.
Head on the capital. I'll ask Mary to come up and sit beside me in case you have any question about the 100 and some projects that are involved in this particular amendment. but our capital budget was 141 million. This amendment would take it to about 165 million. And there's really 4 different things that are happening. There's some new projects. There's 3 of those. So that adds 3.7 million. That's on the next slide, and we'll talk about that. There's a reallocation of budget. Most of those are pooled accounts. For instance, in IT, we had a pool of 1.3 million, and what they've done is taken it from that pool and assigned it to specific projects. And you may have looked at that in the information we sent to you. There's a column that showed the changes. So most of those are pool accounts for IT, facilities, safety, and then we had an other one. So there was 106,000 that went from one engine rebuild account to another engine rebuild account, and one that went from inventory software to parts room security. So those are the nature of those. Really no change in how those dollars were intended to be used. And again, there were 39 of those. Then we'll talk about the change in project estimates. The net of those is about 4 million, and then we had the carryover from one year to another, just getting the right amount carried forward. It's about 16 million for 93 different projects. So we'll talk about the new projects. You've probably heard us talk about all of these in one form or another. Park City Electric Bus. The intent was for Park City to do this. They've asked that we handle this particular project now, so we're just adding it to our budget. And Mary, step in if I misstate any of these. The next 2 are projects in Utah County that were in the CMAQ funding in future years, and those have just been brought forward at the request of MAG into our 2019 budget year.
Let me just add that the majority of those funds are grant funds. It's very little of UTA match. Correct, in these new projects.
Of this 3.7 million, this is the 3 grant that you referred to, Bob?
Yes, so on the Park
Okay.
City Electric Bus, I actually have it calculated out. It's 4% UTA dollars. On the ADA bus stop, it's 93% funded by a grant, as is the Vanpool Vineyard expansion.
Okay.
Those are all 93 to 96% coming from some other source.
From grants. Okay, thank you.
On the Park City bus, does Park City pay that local share, or do we do that out of the goodness of our heart? Or?
So part of the local share is from a Rocky Mountain Power grant that $500,000, and part of the local share is UTA will be paying it, but it will be from funds that we have an agreement to replace those buses. So as Park City pays us for their service, we put some money aside to replace those buses, so it'll be coming out of that fund.
So then these are the other capital carryover. Put them in 2 columns. The change in project estimate, there's 15 total projects. The largest one's the Sharptanic Rail project. Again, we've talked about this with the board in the past where we had money set aside in our budget. This is just putting the entire project in our capital project now. UTA's percentage is 2% of that. 98% is coming from other sources. Then we've had a couple of reductions, and again, the other ones all net out to $500,000 reduction. Total change about $4 million. And again, you've got the detail in your packet of all of those. And then the change in the carryover amounts, a lot of these are just carrying forward projects that the money wasn't spent in 2018 when we were estimating how we'd end up the year 2018. And so it just needs to be carried forward into 2019. And we've listed the 5 largest projects there. The Provo-Orem trip, the electric buses, the BRT design, Ogden, Weber State, the interlocking project that's going on right now that you talked about earlier today. And then we also talked about the parking structure.
Can I add on that too? So we ask everybody to estimate their carryover amounts in August, and it's really hard to estimate what you're going to spend through the end of the year. So that's why those adjustments have to be made.
So what does it do to the capital budget? The middle column there, proposed amendment, a couple of key things to point out. UTA funding actually is going to go down, the amount of cash out of our pocket. The last two rows there, the bond proceeds, that's just shifting the timing of how we're using those proceeds. Some of it's coming from, wasn't spent in 2018, it'll be spent in 2019. Some of it is moving 2020 estimated expense into 2019. And then the leasing, the additional $1 million there is from lease proceeds that we issued last year. The vehicles just hadn't come in by the end of the fiscal year. And again, you can see grants is the biggest adjustment, and then local partner contributions is also fairly large. Questions on the revenues before I show you what it looks like on the expense side?
Any questions from the board?
So on the expense side, again, we've got the Provo Orem trip separated, so that's the $8 million coming forward there. Some of it's bond proceeds, some of it's grant proceeds.
Remind me what trip means. It sounds like we went on an excursion to Provo.
I don't remember exactly what TRIP stands for now, but it's the entire project. You know, we had the BRT, but the TRIP encompassed some of the state work also.
Transportation Improvement Project. So we had the highway or the UDOT improvements for the turn lanes that we included into the project with the BRT.
Yeah, the turn lanes for the BRT, but then they widened the
intersection.
That intersection just to the east of University Mall, the diagonal that goes down into Provo.
Yeah.
That was widened in each direction.
Mm-hmm.
All of that was UDOT work, and so a lot of that comes from this transportation improvement.
And they just used our contractor on the...
Right, we did the work all at
together.
once to minimize the impact to the public.
Okay, thank you.
And so that's how the expense falls out into our 4 categories in the budget. And then the next steps is we will go to the advisory.
Can I ask one question
Sure.
on back on the airport track station relocation? It's obviously more than 2.6. Is that just what we're going to use in this year?
Correct, that's this year's
Okay.
budget.
Okay.
Yeah, the majority of that is in 2020.
In 2020. Okay.
Now, I had a question on the airport tracks. My understanding was that we will continue to run, even during the remodeling of the airport, we'll run the Green Line to its current location. And then when they open the new terminal, we will have a bus bridge from that location to the new terminal. Is that?
Not exactly. So we will run it as long as we can to its current location, but then we're going to have to stop when we start constructing the new station right at front of the terminal. So for that 6-ish months, we'll have to do a bus bridge to take it from. We're going to stop farther up. We're going to put a temporary platform kind of by where the employee parking is, and bus bridge from there to the terminal until we're able to open.
But it will be at the airport.
It will be right at the
Because I had somebody ask me yesterday, when I was at the Provo City Council, they said, are we stopping the Green Line at North Temple?
No.
And I said, no, I don't think that that's in the plan.
Correct. Even when we start the temporary, it'll be
It'll be
on
at
the
the
airport,
airport.
but not at the
Okay.
terminal.
All right, thank you.
And so then the next steps are going to the advisory council because some of the changes meet the criteria we talked about last week, and then it would come to the board on June 19th for the official adoption by resolution.
Any questions from the board on this proposed amendment?
No, thanks, Bob. That was very helpful.
I mean, I guess if we have any questions leading up to the 12th, we'll circle back with you. So.
Certainly, and let's recognize there could be something else that comes up between now and that June 12th meeting, and we may want to go ahead and include that if it's important that it gets adopted as soon as possible.
Bob, how often, and we may have talked about this last time, how often do you sort of anticipate or expect an amendment? And,
Sure.
And I've seen them both directions, but I just, from a functional standpoint.
Sure. So our history here has been about every 3 years.
Oh, wow.
But
that's amazing,
I think in our current scheme, we'll probably be coming every quarter.
Every quarter. Okay. That makes sense.
Chair?
Right. Yeah, please.
You think about the differences that we have in the governance now. We had the president CEO, the board approved that budget, and the president CEO had the ability to work within that. So there are very few parameters that would cause a change that within that total budget that we'd have to come back to the board.
Yeah.
So now with the different thresholds that we have, we'll be back more often. So I would envision Bob comes back in the next year when we have the carryover refined, as soon as that gets done, and there may be one or two other opportunities throughout the year. And it is, like this year we had MAG wanting to accelerate some projects to make sure grants don't expire.
Sure.
So we're going to take advantage of those type of opportunities.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Mary. Next comes to our draft board financial policy. Bob?
This has been an interesting project. This came to me saying, we've got financial policies all over in various documents within UTA. Could you consolidate those and put them into a draft overall financial policy? So that's the genesis of this. It came from the board asking us to look at that. So there's several reasons why you want to have financial policies, right? One is the financial oversight that's charged to the board. You want to make sure you're looking at the long term, just not a year ahead. And then you want to make sure you're taking care of your assets and your infrastructure, a state of good repair. We've talked about it all the time. And then you want to make sure there's internal controls within the organization to ensure that your policy is being carried out. So we're going to talk about all of those in a little more detail in this policy. So in putting together these various topics, I looked at the various policies that we have on right now. I also looked at the GFOA and their recommended policies areas. We don't have all of those policy areas, but they're incorporated in many of these. So we've narrowed it down. I think GFOA had 17. We've got 10 right now. So we'll start with reserves. We've had a couple of comments about reserves, a couple of sessions to talk about this. And this is really a new proposal looking at the reserves. Right now, and I think we give you a sheet in your packet, we've got several reserves that are really kind of general reserves. We've got a fuel reserve, a part reserve, a risk reserve, as well as a working capital reserve. And so the proposal here is to combine all those into one general operating reserve. And then service stabilization, we do have that fund right now. It's at 5%. We've never had to use it, and so the proposal here is to skinny that down a little bit to 3%. Then taking the money that we currently have, creating a new one called Capital Replacement Fund, and setting a goal of being at 1% of our fiscal assets, and that's defined in the financial policy, looking at the CAFR every year. 1% would be about $40 million, so that would be the goal. So taking some of our current reserves and putting it into that reserve just for capital and providing some assurance that if something happened on the capital side, there is some money set aside just for that. The bond reserves are the ones per our bond covenants. That hasn't changed. It's $38 million. And then we've got the debt rate service one from our bond refundings. So the $166 million is what we have in our current reserves. This is just separating it into a little different format. Now note there's some asterisks on this. It's a new policy. It's really a best practice that we're inserting here, suggesting that you should consider it, I guess, is that if any of the service stabilization, capital replacement, or the bond reserves are ever used, those have to be replenished within 60 months. And the theory is, think back to the Great Recession, and some municipalities had to use their reserves. Well, if you don't require them to be fulfilled, you can just kind of let that slide. And so this is a check on ourselves to make sure. Typically, the way that works is you have 24 months to put together a plan of how you're going to refill the reserves, and then 3 years to carry it out.
Ask a question about name, and I just thinking through this on the debt rate service, even though it comes from funding and we're going to obviously look at a refunding possibility. The only thing I wonder about, it's really not tied to debt, right? I look at it as more as a opportunity, future opportunity decision kind of fund. The only thing I have with the name is that is it 21 or 22 when that year comes?
22.
If the financial market's such that it doesn't make any sense to refund it, the story becomes you're taking, debt reduction stuff out of the picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we want, I think the prior board was certainly prudent in thinking through that, but there may be something that says this is a better place to spend it. And so the only thing I wonder, like if we're going through this process, is should we change the name of that fund such that it may or may not be a debt reduction fund? And I don't know, and I'm catching my colleagues off cold, so I'm not trying to get an answer today. I'm just sort of throwing that discussion out there while we're going through this. That if we decide to use it for something different that's important, like a match to a huge federal grant or something, then I wouldn't want people to. Yeah, whatever that is. I'm just not sure what that conversation looks like.
Yeah.
We'll be happy to internally toss around some thoughts on what we could call that.
So think about that as we go through this.
And then that dovetails with my question in an interesting way, because I was thinking in terms of if the bonding agencies are looking at that and we take that, does that have an impact? And so that was just my thought on if we're taking debt rate service and they see that as one thing versus another. That was just a comment that I had. So thanks.
Yeah, I think the rating agencies, they're obviously looking at how we manage the organization. So how that's used, if it makes business sense to use it differently, I think that would be a plus. Okay, on to grants and investments. Again, these are policies that we have right now, but just go through them to make sure people on the vast listening audience know what these are. So on the grants, there's really three things. One, we get formula funds. We talked about that. We use our budget to allocate those into the various allowed uses. And then, as Steve talked about, on discretionary grants, we want to make sure we're pursuing those grants that are consistent with our priorities, whether it's the future of Front Runner or any of the ones that Steve talked about earlier. And then this also includes a requirement that we notify the board anytime there's a discretionary grant over $200,000 is being sought. And the primary reason for that is to understand the matching and what requirements may be in the future for the agency. On the investments, the first comment, the board controls investment of all funds. That's straight from our Senate Bill 136 language. And then it delegates to the pension committee the management of the retirement and the 457. And then it delegates to me the management of all the other funds. Those are the ones I report on every quarter to the board right now. Now, I think you should anticipate underneath each of these, like this financial policy, there'll be other policies that get into a little more of the detail of how that's done. Investments would be one of the great examples. The pension committee has an investment policy, and we have an investment policy too. And so the board would obviously want to be interested in what those policies are and making sure we're complying with the Money Management Act for the ones I invest. As far as debt, there's a lot that the board gets to do here. You get to approve all the bond issues after we've gone through the process of getting the various other reviews and approval, including the State Bonding Commission. You get to improve the contracts for the financial team. That includes the bond counsel, financial advisors, and underwriters. We're out with an RFP right now for underwriters. The one we had before expired in December. You also get to determine the method of sale, whether it's a negotiated or a competitive sale. And you'll want to listen to the financial advisor on what makes the most sense depending upon the type of issuance it is. We've used negotiated sale a lot just because we're transit industry. We've done a lot of refundings, and negotiated just works better in some of those instances. And then according to state law, you approve all other financial instruments. So that could include things like fuel hedging. And leases would be another one. And then the executive directors assign the responsibility to make sure the issuance process on all of these things are followed. It's generally not a problem. The bond counsel, financial advisors come up with calendars of who does what, and we go through those steps. And if you don't go through those steps in order, you usually can't issue the bonds on the time frame you want to issue. Financial reporting, risk management. Again, these are on the financial reporting pretty standard. We'll maintain the books in accordance with GAAP. That's a directive to the comptroller. We provide a quarterly investment report. It's here because it's financial reporting instead of on the investment side. We do the monthly financial statements. And then there are other reports that we're required to do, like NTD, that need to be submitted, prepared according to the rules and then submitted on time. And Steve just signed off on NTD on the 30th of April. On risk management, we already had the last two that will maintain public officials' errors and emission insurance, and that we procure insurance to compensate for losses that might adversely affect UTA. A new requirement, and again, this is a best practice, is that there'd be an annual report on the status of the risk management program. Now, this is not thinking just the risk management program that Dave Pitcher is in charge of. This is thinking about an entity-wide risk management program. So it's a much broader outlook when we talk about risk management right here. Of course, internal controls are very important. So we'll maintain a system of internal controls. The chief auditor has a role to play here, developing internal audit programs. I've got a responsibility to play on opening and closing bank accounts and making sure only authorized users have access to those. The authorized users get approved by the board. And so there's a check there to make sure that we're each doing our part. And then obviously the board gets to select the firm that performs the annual financial report. The auditors report directly to you. So they'll be here in June reporting on the 2018 audit. There's long-term financial planning, some budget. So we do have a long-term financial plan. Our current policy requires that we have that financial plan that we updated at least 3 times a year. That typically happens after the budget is approved, right before we start the budget process, after we have the results of the financial year audited, and then right before we bring a budget to the board, just to make sure that what we're proposing works in the long term. And then there's the new requirement that we talk to the State Bonding Commission at least annually on our long-term financial planning. And we did that was that just last week or the week before?
It was actually a really good discussion, and I loved the statement that the state treasurer made that our bond rating is better than the U.S. Treasury. So, I actually came away with, not that you're supposed to have pride, but I came away with a little bit of pride that we're at least respectable in our efforts.
Mm-hmm. And of course, there'll be an annual budget that's approved that we go through the process. You can amend the budget anytime you want, whether it's quarterly, weekly, the board can do it however often they want to do it. And then there's some discretion for the executive director to make administrative adjustments. We've talked about, we had a head count in accounts payable. It needs to be in accounting. That's all internally. It doesn't, as long as it's within the same thought of how the budget was approved. And this is somewhat of a new requirement. This requires the executive director prepare a 5-year capital plan. We've been working on that. We've done that in the past. But this requires that it be done and that it's updated yearly and that we talk about it during the annual budget discussions. We'll also have a fiscally constrained 5-year plan, and the goals are to protect our capital investment and minimize future maintenance and replacement cost. The next steps, the financial policy would go to the Advisory Council June 12th and then come back to the board on June 19th with any comments from the Advisory Council for your consideration.
Beth, go please.
I had one question / comment on your the long-term financial planning and budget slide. It has the authority will prepare and the board approve an annual budget. Do we have to have clarification about the advisory council in that language, or is that sufficient?
So I summarized it for the slides.
That's what I figured. Okay, just wanted to double check because I thought, well, that's just a point that needs to be made.
Right.
I figured you probably just said the board and as a whole.
Yeah, so one of the things, as we talk about the financial policy, we may want to add to it the process for the budget that we talked about last week as an addendum for the June 19th meeting.
Excuse me, other questions? Okay. Thanks for you and your staff. I know this is a lot of work, and give us a few weeks to kind of look at it too. And also as we get feedback from the advisory council, I think it's some important modifications, so thank you. I think
Just one question. How many policies were replaced with this one policy?
I'm sorry, I didn't count them, but
Numerous.
I did print them out and use those to pull this together, but there were several.
Okay, thank you for that effort, because that had to have been tedious work. Thank you.
and you just made Kent's day, by the way, in the policy reduction world. Probably to the joy of nearly everyone, our meeting next week, will be canceled, and so it puts our next meeting at May 22nd of 2019. Are there any other items that I'm missing? If not, then we'll stand adjourned. Oh, I guess I got to do a motion, sorry.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Well, I'd like to do that twice.
Oh, it's the gavel. Exciting. There you go.